This is the generation of them that seek his face. This is the generation of them that seek his face.
Shabbat Shalom. Sorry about that. We want to welcome each and every one of you today as we come to unleash Torah concerning Pesach, concerning Passover. We want to unleash it because so many times the Torah has been locked up, has been tied. Sometimes I've seen the Torah like shackled with chains, and we need to break the chains off, take all those, unleash it from the bonds that it's had for most of Christianity for 2,000 years. And for many, even within Judaism, the Torah is still locked up, and we need to open it up. And so it is my prayer that we could open up Torah to you. Now, we're going to begin, before we begin our actual study, this is a calendar that I produced, and it is the Aviv calendar, the month of Aviv, April 2022. Of course, you see the little numbers are the numbers of the Gregorian calendar, and the big numbers here, these boxes, are the days of the Hebrew. Now, this last Sunday evening, was the new moon. The new moon. So this is Sunday, what we call Sunday night, and then over here is Monday morning. And so this represents the night of Aviv 1 and the day of Aviv 1, the night of Aviv 2. So today we are in the day of Aviv 6. We are in Aviv 6 right now, the day portion. Of course, in Gregorian, this is Saturday. And so Shabbat is the Seder. Passover begins on the 14th, and it carries over to Sunday, the 17th. So on the 14th of the Hebrew calendar and the 15th is the Seder, the Passover, and the first day of unleavened bread, which is also Shabbat and a Regelim, a pilgrim feast, probably from about 8 to 9 other calendars that are out there. And I respectfully even submit myself to those that know more than I do. But this is the calendar that, as I have studied over the years, and again, like I said, if this is different from the calendar you're using, remember, at least we're getting back to Passover. At least we're getting back to the feast. We still have to fine-tune ourselves, and I might have to tweak to you, or you might have to tweak to me. But ultimately, when Messiah comes, then we will really know. For now, Paul says we know in part. So this is from the studies that I've done for, over 30, 40 years of studying the Hebraic way. And so I really want to make sure that everybody has this calendar. By the way, on Passover Day, the 17th, most people are going to be celebrating this in the Catholic and Protestant world as Easter. In the evangelical world, of course, they're calling it, some of them call it Easter, but Resurrection Day or Resurrection Sunday. On the day that is Passover is the Christian world's Easter and or Resurrection Sunday. But we are going to celebrate Resurrection Day, Bekurim, on the 24th. On the 24th. And so we are going to be 1 week off, 1 week after the whole Christian world. And why is that? On this Wednesday, we're going to be teaching that. If I do have time at the end of I did put this calendar at the end of our teaching today so that we could go over that. And then, of course, next Sabbath, which is right before the Passover, our whole teaching is going to be on, we're going to deal a little bit with Yeshua's resurrection, last week in Yeshua's life, but next week we are even going to go further into that. So just to present the calendar right away from the front, so that everybody knows where we're talking about this year. Every year it's going to be different. Passover always occurs at a different time in the Gregorian calendar. Same time in the biblical calendar, same moon, same everything, but different in the Gregorian calendar. And because most of the world follows the Gregorian calendar, part of the confusion is because of that. But let's go on to our teaching. Today we're going to continue our Secrets of Passover, an examination of Passover from a Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic perspective. And today we are in part 3. And we said, what is Passover? And our first week we saw that Passover was the historic purchasing of Israel from Pharaoh in Egypt. And then we saw that Passover was a yearly feast that recalls this event. Today we're going to see that Passover is also the day that Yeshua inaugurated the new covenant and purchased everlasting life by his death for mankind. And again, if we have time, we'll start with Passover as the basis of the modern Jewish Seder and the Christian Holy Communion. And we'll look at some of that and continue probably at 4 until next week. But Passover is the day Yeshua inaugurated the new covenant. And I want everybody to know right now, because of Jeremiah 31:31, behold, the days are coming when I will make a Brit Chadashah, a new covenant, a renewed covenant. I'm going to renew my covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Remember, Jeremiah 31 says that the Brit Chadashah, the renewed covenant, Adonai is going to renew the covenant. Adonai is not going to chuck the first covenant, the Mosaic covenant, out and start a brand new one. Adonai is not going to say, okay, Israel, you failed, so therefore I'm going to make another covenant with the Gentiles. It's not like that. Adonai is not replacing this with this. What Adonai is doing is because he says, I am making a new covenant, a Brit Chadashah, with the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda, not like the covenant I made with them when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. They broke that covenant of mine. And so because Israel, Judah, and the whole Israel, all the tribes, they broke that covenant with the golden calf incident. Because Israel broke the covenant, not Adonai. Adonai is not breaking the covenant. He did not break the covenant. Israel is the one that broke the covenant. Therefore, Adonai is going to renew the broken covenant. Renew it. Now, when you renew it, you bring it up to par. To bring it up to par. And so what Adonai did is with Moses, the first covenant, that covenant was broken by Israel. Jeremiah says, I am going to renew it, from Adonai's words. In Yeshua's time, Yeshua now, when Yeshua took the cup, he said in the same way after supper, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. When you drink it, drink this as a memorial of me. So the new covenant of Jeremiah, which was a renewal of the first covenant of Moses, occurred at Passover night. Yeshua renewed the first covenant on Passover night. And he said, this is the cup of the new covenant. Yeshua now became our Korban Pesach. Yeshua became our Passover. It says in 1 Corinthians 5:7, for Messiah, our Passover, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the feast. Yeshua is the Korban Pesach of Moses. The renewed covenant makes him. And when he said, lifted up this cup is the Brit Chadashah. Now, Adonai, the Father, Adonai, is renewing the covenant through his Son, through the death of his Son. Yeshua became that Korban for Adonai, not just for Israel now, because it's not only Israel who has sinned, but the whole world has sinned, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of Adonai, we are told. Therefore, all need a sacrifice, all need a Korban Pesach to take away their sin. And that is exactly what Yeshua did. So, yeah, we've been studying the Passover of Moses. We've been studying it historically. Last week we looked at the historic ways that it has been done. But Yeshua now brings it and makes it for himself. And we're going to see that Yeshua takes the original Mosaic Passover and he doesn't do away with it, but he adds to it. There's an addition that Moses did not have. There's an addition that Israel did not have. There's an addition that David and Zerubbabel and Ezra, and they didn't have. And Yeshua is the one who brings this in. Passover at the time of Yeshua, again, was in two parts. From Moses' time, it was always in two parts. Part number one, at Yeshua's time, was a sacrifice at Herod's temple. And Josephus said that the sacrifices, because remember, in Goshen, everybody did Passover between the two evenings in their home. The second Passover in Numbers 9 and subsequent Passovers until this time were done in the tabernacle and then taken home to be prepared in Solomon's first temple, in Zerubbabel's second temple, in all the different temples, and then now Herod's temple. Herod rebuilds Zerubbabel's second temple. And Josephus says that they came in three sets. That the first set, because there were so many people by the time of Yeshua, they would have to not just have one set of people coming and bringing their lambs, but one man brought the lamb for his family or for his Passover group. And so the first set was packed. The second set, well, there wasn't that many people. And then Josephus says that the third set was about half of the second set. And so people would come in sets, and probably from the late afternoon, they'd start coming and sacrificing so that all the sacrifices could be done by the end of the time of between the two evenings by twilight. And of course, the lambs were taken home to be prepared. And so the first set was a sacrifice in Herod's temple. The lambs were taken home. They were prepared. They were roasted. And then the Seder meal began right after it had become dark. The Korban Pesach with matzah and maror. Okay, those are two things, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The lamb with matzah, unleavened bread, and maror, bitter herbs. And of course, telling the story, talking about our deliverance from Egypt, our freedom, our rescuing, what Adonai did. This is the way Passover was done at the time of Yeshua, which is the same one as all the subsequent ones after Goshen, exactly the way they did it. But remember, Yeshua came as the Son. And because he came as the Son, we're going to see some interesting things here, some interesting secrets. In the first century, a banquet was called a triclenium table. This is a triclenium table. You see it in a U shape. Now, today, when we do banquets, usually the host or the head party sits in the middle. In biblical times, the triclenium table, it was in a U-shaped, but they all sat in order of importance. Remember the verse that says when you are invited to a table to eat, do not take the first part. Because what if there's somebody more important and the host says, oh, why don't you go sit in part number 3 or in the 4th position? Oh, you come over here and sit next to me, the important position. So he says, sit in the back, sit in the least important position, and the host will bring you to the front. And so over here in this triclenium table, you see that it starts from here in the top. And this is John, the youngest person in the group, always sat in the first position. The youngest person, he's the one, like even today in the tradition that says, Manishta now, why is this night different from any other night? And so the youngest person always sits here. The host is in the second position. So this is Yeshua. Right there is Yeshua in the second position. And then the guest of honor is in the third position. And the guest of honor that night was Judas. Think of this. Yeshua put Judas on as the guest of honor of his last Passover. And of course, from then on, it went by number. And here is Peter. Peter is in the last position. He's the last guy. And it's the host that says, okay, you go here, you go here. So Yeshua put Peter in the last position. And we know that too because when Yeshua washed the feet of the disciples, the last one to have his feet washed was Peter. Now, over here, Yeshua has just said, one of you is going to betray me, and the one who dips in the sop with me, that's the bitter herb, the bitter herbs right there. And Judas is right now dipping with Yeshua, and Yeshua said, one of you is going to betray me. And Peter, across, it mentions, motions to John, Kenes, who is it? And of course, John is no say. And so they're motioning to each other there. And the other ones are just eating from the sop that will be passed around. And there was usually one cup and one sop, and everybody dipped very much like people today dip their corn tortillas into the salsa. Very, very much like that. And so this is the way a Passover table looked in the first century. It was called a triclenium, or three-sided table banquet. So, and of course there was cushions. By the way, this person, Yeshua kind of seems to be sitting there, the artist kind of, but what they would do is they would actually lean on their left. And it says that John, who was at the breast of Yeshua, and what that means is if you have a person here and then you lean over to talk to them, then you are, in a sense, right next to their chest. And so that's what that idiom means. And of course, Yeshua was what's called at the breast of Judas. Yeshua had his disciples prepare the Passover according to Torah. And this is important for us to understand. Now, part of the confusion today has to do with, did Yeshua do a Passover meal, or did he institute a Holy Communion separate from Passover. Of course, I'm one of those that believes that he did do a Passover meal. And the disciples came to Yeshua saying, where will you want that we prepare for you to eat the Passover? They asked him, where do you want us to do the Passover? Prepare the Passover. The Passover is something that has to be prepared. It was starting to be prepared even, 3-4 days before. And his disciples went forth and they made ready the Passover. So they bought all the things that were necessary for the Passover. And of course, they only needed a place to have the Passover. And so they got the lamb on the 10th of Aviv. The lamb was selected. And once the lamb was selected, they bought a lamb and ready to take it to the temple. And so the disciples did this. The Passover with Yeshua occurred in 2 parts also. The disciples sacrificed the lamb and prepared the upper room for the celebration. Then part 2, they had the Seder. Yeshua and his disciples gather. Luke 22:14 says, when the time came, he took his place at the table, the second position, and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have eagerly longed to eat this Pesach, this Passover, with you before I suffer, because I tell you, I shall not eat it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of Elohim. Until the millennial Passover. Remember, Yeshua is going to reinstitute the feast for the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. All the feasts, the temple is going to be rebuilt by Yeshua. What we call the 4th temple, Yeshua is going to rebuild the Ezekiel temple. And all the feasts, all the sacrifices, the sin sacrifice, communion sacrifice, Yeshua is going to fulfill everything in the millennium. So Passover is going to be fulfilled. So Yeshua is not going, this is his last Passover. He's not going to do Passover. He shall not eat it, the Pesach, until the kingdom. And in the kingdom, we will eat the Passover again with Yeshua. Now, the Passover will be eaten in the kingdom. And interestingly enough, by the mortals that are there. But remember, immortals could eat also. And I was thinking about that the other day. I said, well, I wonder if the resurrected who will come down and rule and reign with Yeshua for those 1,000 years as immortals, if they will be able to eat the Passover. And then I said, well, you know what? Yeshua, after his resurrection, ate. So if Yeshua ate after the resurrection in the Passover, and he's telling his disciples, I shall not eat again till it's fulfilled in the kingdom of Elohim. That's an interesting study that, we could study some more and see what we could get. That's one of those secrets that I always come up with and think, and needs further thought, needs further study. But the Passover with Yeshua, exactly the way everybody was doing it, exactly the way Moses taught us, in 2 parts. Now, Yeshua adds a 3rd part to Passover. Yeshua adds a 3rd part. He institutes a 3rd part to the Passover of Moses. Yeshua predicted the destruction of the temple, anticipating the end of the sacrificial system for a time until the millennium. He institutes a memorial of himself with the unleavened bread as his body and the cup with the first fruit of the vine as his blood. Now remember, Yeshua, being the son of Elohim, being also a prophet like unto Moses, the prophet like unto Moses, prophesied the destruction of the temple. On the day that Yeshua came in, it was a Shabbat, on what people call Palm Sunday. It was actually a Shabbat. And Yeshua comes into Jerusalem and he weeps over Jerusalem. And he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if you had only known on this day the message of peace, but it is hidden from your eyes. Therefore, the enemy will come in and they will dash your babies on the stones, all because you did not recognize your opportunity when Elohim offered it. Every stone is going to be destroyed. Not one stone of the temple is going to be left. Yeshua prophesied the destruction of the temple. This was in about 30 A.D. The temple was destroyed 40 years later in 70 A.D. And so Yeshua prophesied that there was going to be destruction of the temple. Can you imagine if Yeshua would have done what the Jews did from the time of Moses? And when they ate the Passover, they ate a piece of the Passover lamb. They ate a piece of matzah. They ate some maror. And they ate those in what we would call communion style as a ritual. But can you imagine if Yeshua would have taken the meat, the lamb, the korban pasach, and says, this is my body? At 70 A.D., he would have been a false prophet. Why? Because you cannot eat lamb, Pesach lamb, with no temple, with no priesthood. But Yeshua anticipated as a prophet, anticipated as the Son, anticipated. So he takes the matzah bread. He takes the bread and he takes the cup. And with the bread and the cup, he says, this is my body and this is my blood. And he uses the symbol of bread and wine as the symbol of his body and his blood. And this he instituted after supper. After the Passover supper, after it was done, completed, Yeshua now takes what we would call the leftover bread. The bread that is after that you don't eat, but Yeshua started this new third part. Yeshua not replacing the Passover. Underline that. That's one of those secret things you need to underline. Yeshua not replacing the Passover, but adding to it an after supper portion. An after supper portion. Then he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. He did the same with the cup after supper. And he said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you. A lot of people don't realize that after supper, when we say after supper, it means that it's a done deal. The first part was the sacrificed lamb, prepared, and then eaten in ritual fashion, in Seder fashion. The word Seder means an arrangement, an order, a liturgy, a service, an arranged way of doing it. But after it was over, Yeshua now decides to get an extra cup, an extra bread, and use this extra cup and extra bread to signify his body given for you, given for us, and for the whole world. Most people don't realize that Passover, even the Jewish Passover, they're doing the third part. Where did Judaism get the third part? From Messiah, from Yeshua. The Afikomen, that wasn't Jewish. That wasn't part of the Mosaic. The third cup, that wasn't Mosaic. That wasn't part of the rituals from Moses to Yeshua's time. No, it was Yeshua who instituted the third part. And now, when Christianity kicked out the rest of it, they kicked out the baby with the bathwater, and they even kicked out the third part from Yeshua's way. And then they brought in what we call today the Mass, which is, again, we're going to see, if we have time, a little bit of that today. The Passover celebration was on Aviv 14. When on Yeshua's week, it was a Tuesday night. So Tuesday at sundown was the beginning of Aviv. Now here's one of the areas where many Messianics disagree on. We know that it says the 14th is the Passover and the 15th is the date of unleavened bread. But what a lot of Messianics do is they celebrate the Passover not at the beginning of the 14th, but at the end of the 14th, and they're actually eating the Passover on the 15th. Now, I'm one of those that disagrees with that, and I believe that the Passover Seder should be done at the beginning of the 14th. And again, we've been looking at that on Tuesdays and Wednesdays here. And so if you want further information, please join us on Wednesday, because then you could ask all the questions. Those of you that might be watching us from Hawaii, fly in. If you're watching us from New York City, fly in on a Wednesday night, and you could be part of our study here. We encourage you to do that. At a Tuesday at sundown, Passover day followed. Remember, we have 12 hours of night, 12 hours of day. 12 hours of night, and I teach that Yeshua died on Passover of the 14th, a Wednesday at 3 p.m. So if Passover night was on Tuesday night, Yeshua did his Seder with his disciples on Tuesday night, then Wednesday day is Passover day. So not only did Yeshua do the Passover on Passover night, the 14th, but he died on Passover day. So the Seder and his death were on the same 24-hour biblical date. Different in the Gregorian calendar, Tuesday and Wednesday, but the same day in the Hebrew calendar. And Yeshua was buried on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He was our unleavened bread on the 15th, which was Wednesday at sundown, the 5th day of the week. And then Yeshua resurrected on first fruits, the first day of the week, Aviv 18th. In that year, every year it's going to be different. This year is going to be on the 21st. That would be Saturday at sundown. So you have Yeshua doing Passover on Tuesday night, dying on Wednesday day, being buried at Wednesday at sundown, and the clock starts according to the prophecy of Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days, 3 nights. So Yeshua will be at the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. That means Yeshua had to resurrect on what we call Saturday night at sundown. That's a complete 72-hour. Again, many of you that might be listening do not believe that. The majority of Christians believe that Yeshua died on Friday and that he was put in the ground Friday night, which means that he was on Gregorian Friday night, all night in the grave, all day Saturday in the grave, and then on Sunday morning he rose from the dead. And again, that's 2 nights in 1 day. I cannot follow the Catholic Protestant system of Good Friday to Easter Sunday morning. I threw that out the window many years ago. And this is what I teach. And again, with all humility, I present it to you, and all humbleness, believing that from the best of my ability to study, and I've studied, this is what I see. Yeshua did not die on Good Friday and did not rise on Sunday morning or on Easter Sunday morning. And again, here is the Matthew 12:40. For as Jonah was 3 days, 3 nights in the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Wednesday at sundown to Saturday at sundown, 3 days, 3 nights equals 72 hours. And I present that for your study. Here is the 3 days and 3 nights. Here is a view of it as I've seen it. Again, here's the 14th. Yeshua does this Passover Seder at the beginning of the 14th. Remember, 12 hours of night, 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night, 12 hours of day. It is not the way midnight to midnight. Today we go midnight to midnight. They did not go midnight to midnight. They went sundown to sundown. And of course, everything that occurred in there from the Passover Seder, going to Gethsemane, Yeshua is arrested. He's taken to the trials. He's crucified at 9 a.m. And he dies at 3 p.m. And he, right before sundown, if you remember, they put him in the ground in between the 2 evenings so that by dark time he would not be there. So that begins the 3 days and 3 nights. 1, 2, 3. And so he rises up on between the 2 evenings again on Saturday. And Mary and them come to the grave when it says when it was still dark. So it was still dark. The sun hadn't risen. There was no sunrise service. Mary did not do the first sunrise service. When she went, it was still dark. And Yeshua resurrected in that week, the first day of the week, Yom Rishon, the first day, which to us would be a Sunday. But remember, our Sundays today begin at midnight. Their first day actually began at the end of the Sabbath, is the beginning of the first day of the week. And so this chart kind of gives you a good bird's eye view of the way it was. Yeshua's Passover week, of course, Tuesday at sundown. And I want to present this from different ways so that you could actually get it and know it and be able to teach it. On the 14th of Aviv, it was a Tuesday at sundown, the 4th day of the week. The Passover celebration at the upper room. Again, to Gethsemane, the arrest, the trial, the condemnation. 9 a.m. crucifixion, 3 p.m. death. And then after his death, and they bring him down, they do a tahara. Remember, it was Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus who do perform a tahara with Yeshua. And because it was late and the sun was already going down and he had to be in the grave in between those 2 evenings, they could not fulfill all the tahara, and they needed to put more aloes. And so that's why Mary and them tried to do that on Sunday after the 2 Sabbaths, because there was 2 Sabbaths that they had to contend with that week. And of course, the 15th of Aviv, sundown, he's buried between the 2 evenings. The 15th of Aviv, the next day, which is still the 15th of Aviv, is a Sabbath day, by the way. It is a special Sabbath, and that's the first Sabbath of a special Sabbath that week. And again, Thursday at sundown, Friday at sundown, and then Shabbat, Saturday at sundown, and then the resurrection. So this was his Passover, his last week here before his resurrection. Only part 2. Now this is just a little side note. Only part 2 of the Passover could be celebrated outside of Jerusalem and after 70 AD by Israel. Only part 2. Part 1, the sacrifice, could not be celebrated outside of Jerusalem or after 70 AD. The apostles celebrated part 1, part 2, and the New Covenant, part 3, for 40 years between Yeshua and the destruction of the temple. After the destruction of the temple, the apostles could only do part 2 and part 3. After 70 AD, only part 2 and part 3 could be done. In 1 Corinthians, outside of Jerusalem, the Corinthians were outside of Jerusalem there in 1 Corinthians 10 and 11. They could only do part 2 and part 3. The Master's Memorial. Passover is a yearly reminder and memorial to his death until his second coming. Every time you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Master's death until he comes. Now, they were having a Passover. We know that they were having a Passover because this Passover in Corinth, the Corinthians had turned the Passover into a symposia meal. One of the things that in the Greek culture they have, we call it a symposium today, where you have speakers come and speak. Well, that comes from what's called a symposia, which they would have these philosophers come and speak, and everybody would be eating and drinking. They'd be eating and drinking. Well, we know that the Greco-Roman world loved to overeat and overdrink, and they love to get drunk, and that's what the Feast of Dionysius is during what we call Christmas time. And in Rome and all these places, all these times were times of excessive drinking and eating, gluttony and drunkenness. And so what Paul gets mad at the Corinthians here, because what they were doing is when they were coming together for the Seder meal, for the Pesach meal, they were overeating and they were overdrinking. So can you imagine having all these little fellowships that we would have here, and everybody gets drunk and overeats, and you invite someone and then you eat all the food, and even poor people, Paul says, poor people go home and they didn't get any matzah, they didn't get any of the celebratory meal. And he gets mad at them. So 1 Corinthians 11 is a Passover. We know it's a Passover because Paul says, for this is what I received from the Master, and turn on, pass it on to you, that on the night that he was betrayed, he took bread. So Paul is reminding them of Passover night. Until he comes. Has he come? No. We're still waiting for Messiah. So therefore, every time is not according to a pastor. It's not according to the Pope. It's not according to the Synod or the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's not according to any group. It's according to Adonai. Every time Passover, it's on the 14th of Aviv. No questions asked. The 14th of Aviv, period. It's not every week. It's not once a month. It's not every 6 months, every 4 weeks, every quarter. It's not whatever the boards, the bishops, the pastors, the priests, the ministers want. And every one of you, especially Protestant congregations, it's a mess out there with regards to Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper, the Lord's table, the Mass. Why? Because everybody does it differently. In fact, there's some groups that are doing it with leavened bread, with French bread. And they're doing it with, crackers, cookies, Pepsi. You can't do stuff like that. In fact, now, I saw, they have little boxes. You could go to the Christian bookstore and get a little box. And in the little box, it has 24 little cups, like the little half and half milk that you pour on your coffee at the restaurant. They have little cups like that with grape juice. And then on the top of where you peel the thing off, they have a little round wafer. And it's, of course, vacuum packed. So they get that, and they pass that around, and everybody, takes the little wafer out, and takes a little cup. And that's what Passover has been reduced to in Christianity. Some use little squares. And of course, some use leavened bread. Some do it on Sundays. Some do it. In fact, there was a ministry out there on TV that we said that they were even selling those so that everybody could have communion every day. Well, we need to get away from all that and go to what Adonai says, the 14th. Every time you eat this bread means only one time a year, the 14th, not as often as some translations say, until he comes. So Passover, which is what the whole context of this is, should be done once a year. There's accountability in Passover, as we said. Therefore, anyone who eats the bread or drinks the cup of the master unworthily is answerable for the body and the blood of the master. Everyone is to examine himself before he eats of the bread or drinks of the cup, because a person who eats and drinks without recognizing the body is eating and drinking his own condemnation. So this is why I said one of the most important things, that if you're going to go to Passover, make sure you are baptized. No unbaptized believer should ever partake of Passover. This means that unless you are fully immersed underwater in baptism, in immersion, in mikvah, you cannot participate in Passover. You have to have a circumcised heart. Our hearts should be circumcised. In fact, that's what 1 Corinthians 5 is all about. There were some people who were living in immorality, living in away from Adonai, and they were going to participate in the Passover. And Paul says, get rid of the guy, excommunicate him. Do not allow him. You cannot eat of this in an unworthy manner. You have to be walking right and in circumcision of heart. So if somebody invites you to Passover and you're not right with Adonai, you backslid, maybe you're not a believer, do not invite unbelievers to your Seder. Do not let them partake of your Seder, especially the third part, because that is representative of Yeshua. If they eat and drink without, and most people, if they're not believers, they're not going to recognize that this is the body of Messiah. Like it says in 1 Corinthians 10, the bread that we break is a koinonia, a fellowship, a communion with the body of Messiah. The cup that we drink is a communion with the blood of Messiah. And so we need to recognize what we're doing. So be careful, and this should make people afraid of not participating. Remember, all the other feasts, you can invite people, especially Sukkot. That's the Feast of the Nations. That's where everybody from the nations is invited according to Torah. But Passover is only for the family of believers. Only believers should be there. If you have family members that are not believers, do not invite them. Even though they're part of your family, do not invite them. This is for the believing family. Not just the blood family, but the believing family of Adonai only. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not a koinonia with the blood of Messiah? The bread which we break, is it not a koinonia with the body of Messiah? And the koinonia means a fellowship, a commonness, a unity, a oneness. So when we eat the bread and drink of the cup, we are in a oneness with Yeshua. and what he did for us. Once a year, as often, every time is only once a year during Pesach, not when we want to. And I want to stress, especially any pastors that might be listening, please, please, it's not up to us. It's up to him. Yeshua could discipline us with sickness and or death if we partake in an unworthy manner. That is why many of you are weak and ill, and some have died. If we judged ourselves, we would not be disciplined. But when we are disciplined, and the discipline would either be sickness, weakness, or death, that's a discipline by the Master. We are corrected by the Master to save us from being condemned along with the world. So again, this is in context to Passover. Now, even the Christian churches that use this for their Holy Communions, their Lord's tables, their Masses, they never warn people about this. If they really believe that there should be no open Holy Communions, and almost every Baptist, and sometimes in the Catholic Church, if you go to a wedding or a funeral, they'll say, if you're not a Catholic, do not partake. I won't partake anyway. But the thing is, do not partake of Holy Communion in any Christian congregation, because it's an open, and if they really believe what they said they do, if that is the true way, then Passover, there's no such thing as Passover. And all this should be done away with, if that's what they believe. But they don't even warn their people. So I think we really need to start looking at it from the Pesach, from the Passover. It must be on the 14th of Aviv between the two evenings. Passover is on the 14th of Aviv, the beginning of the 14th, between the two evenings. Of course, no sacrificial lamb today. Do not sacrifice. I've known groups that sacrifice today. Today, the Samaritans are the only ones that are doing sacrifices. Every year they have the Passover sacrifice. But do not. There's some of you that listen to us that are not part of congregations, and you might have a little home fellowship. There's many Messianics that live out there in the mountains or other places that don't have opportunity to come to areas where there's a congregation. And I've known a couple that sacrificed and even were putting blood on the doorposts of the house. Do not do that. Do not do that. Each participant must be walking in circumcision of the heart, no walking in drunkenness or gluttony, immorality, and there's all kinds of other disciplines that we need to follow. Everyone is to examine himself before he eats of the bread or drinks of the cup. There should be a time of self-examination before you partake of part number 3. Make sure, leaders, bring everyone that's at your table to a time of sorrow and repentance and say, Father, if there's anything, just come complete repentance. And we must, again, come to this portion of the Passover. We celebrate that with joy and how we're delivered from Egypt. And with this, there should be a sorrow, a holy sorrow, if it says you must examine yourself. And the examinations should start weeks ahead, by the way, or time ahead. But I always do it, especially right before we partake, just in case there's someone that has not yet repented. That the apostolic Kehillah had a Passover Seder is evident from 1 Corinthians 10 and 1 Corinthians 11. Some believers in Corinth were overeating and were getting drunk at the Passover meal. Paul rebukes and warns of the discipline for not understanding its significance. Okay, and of course at Corinth, even though the temple was still going there, they could not do part 1 in Corinth. They could only do part 2 and part 3 because they were believers in Yeshua. In the King James Version, 1 Corinthians 11:20 uses the term the Lord's Supper. This in the Greek is, and here's the Greek, kuriakon daipnon. Kuriakon daipnon. Kuriakon means belonging to the master. Kurios is master. Kuriakon means belonging to the master. And a daipnon is a formal supper or a banquet. The Passover part 3 is called the Master's Banquet. And again, this is what it's not just a informal supper, or it's not just an informal eating. It's not just eating. It's a banquet. So part 1 of the Mosaic was the sacrifice of the lamb. We can't have that no more. Part 2 was the Seder, the arrangement of remembering Egypt, remembering with the bread and the bitter herbs. And today we have a shank bone of a lamb to remember the lamb of the Passover. But the part 3 is called the Master's Banquet. So the Seder now is in 2 parts. Part 2, the Seder, the arrangement of the Mosaic remembrance, and the Master's Banquet, which is the remembrance of what Yeshua did for us. The term and participation in Holy Communion has theologically and historically replaced Passover in Christianity. Other terms used in Christianity are the Mass. You've heard people say, I'm going to Mass. The word Mass, by the way, I don't know, I thought I had it here, but I guess I don't, came from the Latin et missa, which means be dismissed, which is interesting because anyone was invited to the Roman Catholic service. Anybody was invited. And they would do the confession of sin, they would do the readings, and they would do the gospel and readings from what they call the Old Testament and New Testament. But after that was done, the priest or one of his deacons would say, et missa, which means in Latin, be dismissed. And all unbaptized persons, look at that, all unbaptized persons were dismissed. And only baptized persons were allowed in the church. In fact, they locked the doors, and only baptized persons were allowed to do their Holy Communion. Isn't it interesting that the Catholic Church retained a little bit about what Torah said, that no uncircumcised person should participate? And of course, Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Paul talk about the circumcision of the heart. And so that's where the term Mass comes from. The Eucharist is actually the blessing. Every time that you say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, blessed are you, Adonai, King of the universe, you've given us bread from the earth. Or Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen, that you've given us the fruit of the vine. That is called the Eucharist. The Eucharist is not the bread. Oops, where did they get that from? They turned the bread into the Eucharist. The Eucharist in the Latin and Greek, the Eucharisto, means the blessing, the bracha, the baruch atah. So they got that wrong. But anyways, they call that too, the little thing. And some people call it the Lord's table. Some people even call it breaking bread. But breaking bread is not Holy Communion. Breaking bread is an idiom for eating. Anytime you eat, you break bread. So we do not do Holy Communion here, and I encourage, especially Messianic groups, do not do Holy Communion. We only do Pesach once a year with the Seder and the Master's Banquet. Yeshua nor his apostles instituted or inaugurated the Catholic Mass, the Eucharist, the Holy Communion, the Lord's table. He continued the Passover. So if you're Roman Catholic or Protestant, Evangelical, Baptist, Pentecostal, He never instituted what you're doing. He never instituted what you're doing. He continued the Passover. And Yeshua stood at a Passover table. And he says, every time you do this to remember me. He didn't say, every time you do that. The little wafer with the little orange juice, or the wafer with the cup that only the priest drinks and you don't. You just open your mouth and he didn't institute that. He says, every time you do this, what was the this? It was the Passover. It wasn't what tradition has come with in Christianity. To only take bread in the cup every day, every week, every month, or when the synod or board decides, or when the pastor or whoever, on a Sunday, or whenever the synod, board, or you decide, are man-made traditions that Yeshua did not institute and or authorize. He didn't do that. Only what Moses said, only what Messiah said, and what the apostles said do we follow. Not anything before, outside of them, or after, outside of them, by Jewish and or Christian authorities. There's protocols for a Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic Passover Seder. Now, why do we conduct a Mosaic, Messianic, Apostolic Seder, MMA? Why do we conduct this? Because Torah commands every male to keep Passover. The Israelites must keep the Passover at the appointed time. The 14th of this month at twilight, you will keep it with all the protocols and customs proper to it. At Passover, we remember, for Messiah, our Passover has been sacrificed. Let us keep the feast, Paul says. Let us keep it. He didn't do away with it. He said, let's continue to keep it. You're not keeping it if you're doing all that other stuff. That other stuff is 2 plus 2 equals 5. It is not 2 plus 2 equals 4. What if you don't keep Passover? Is Passover optional for believers? And I'm talking about Gentile believers, because some people say, well, the Passover, that's for Jews. Holy Communion is for us. Where does it say that? It doesn't say that. Passover is not optional. They will keep it following the entire Passover ritual. But anyone who fails to keep the Passover, such a person will be excommunicated from his people. That's what Adonai said. For not having brought the offering to Yahweh at its appointed time. And our offering is Yeshua, that he offered himself for us in our place, for us. That person will bear the consequences of the sin. Can you imagine? According to Torah, it is a sin not to participate in Passover. And all these people are not participating in Passover. The original and all subsequent biblical Passovers are conducted at home. As such, it is our goal to train every male head of household here to conduct a Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic Seder. Passover is not a synagogue or church service. It is the male head of house who should conduct the Seder, not the Cohen, not the rabbi, not the pastor. Think of it. In biblical times, the Kohanim, the Leviim, they did not do Passovers for the people. Every head of household, you are the priest in your home. You have to do it. It is not a sacerdotal duty. It is not the duty of the priest. When a denomination says that only this person, this priest, this bishop could hocus pocus and turn this bread into a body, and then only he could do it. And he has been specifically, his hands have been specifically set apart to that's man-made doctrine. That's false teaching. How to conduct. The date and time is the 14th at sundown. The sacrifice, it is finished. We don't do number 1 yet. When Yeshua comes back, he'll do it. Part 2, the Seder Haggadah, Exodus 12, the shank bone, unleavened bread, bitter herb. That's all you need. The meal, any kosher food as desired. Part 3, the Master's banquet after supper. The Afikomen, the He shall come. The cup, the 3rd cup. And then praise time. This is the Seder ritual elements. Remember on the one from last week, on the shank bones, it was the actual lamb. Today we only put shank bones as remembrance, the unleavened bread, and the bitter herbs, plural. We really don't have time for this, but the Passover secret of the matzah tash and the afikomen. In fact, let's go ahead and just stop here today, and then we'll continue with this for next week, because this is going to be good. This takes time, so we will stop here for today. There's so much that I just want to pass over, and again to you all, and again with all humility. We want to say, this is what I've learned. I want to pass it on to you, what Adonai has shown me. And hopefully together we could even learn some more. Let's go ahead and stand. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to be here. And next week, Father, as we continue on part 4, that your Ruach HaKodesh, Father, might allow us to learn more, and be part of what you are trying to teach your body today. Father, there is a revival of Passover, a revival throughout. Even Christian churches are doing Passovers too, Father. I disagree with having Passovers and Holy Communion, but Father, that means that something's stirring. But Father, right now, with all the people that are doing it, even if we're doing it in different days, different ways of doing it, Father, little by little, start tweaking us together into a unity of the faith, so that all of us, Father, all of us come and
This is the generation.
in Yeshua's name, amen. Woo! Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries. Thank you for joining us on our channel. If you have enjoyed this teaching and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we have new videos. If you would like to support Olive Tree Fellowship,
This is the generation of them that seek his face. This is the generation of them that seek his face. By the peace, oh Yahweh, who's bringing us power